Can some people hear me okay, yes or no, and then some people not hear me? Is that what's going on? Okay, great. So, oh, here we go. I'm just going through the list right now, just seeing where everybody's from. I saw Wisconsin. I got my master's in library and information science from University of Wisconsin-Madison. Are there any other alumni from there? And I got my master's in French literature from the University of Oklahoma in Norman, Oklahoma, way back in the 90s. Are there any alumni from there or librarians? Oh, yay, Madison. I've been to Tallahassee. I've not been to Fort Collins. I used to live in Colorado Springs for a year after college. It was my lost year. Someone was at Simmons, that's in Boston, right? I was born in Lynn, so that's my original hometown-ish. I'm from all over. I am actually giving my presentation today in our library classroom, and I have a few of my colleagues sitting in with me, and I thought it would be a great way to do the presentation because otherwise it would be like going to confession. You know, I was raised Catholic, so it would be like going to confession, having that screen and talking into the abyss with not knowing who is on the other side. So it'll be nice to have this presentation and have some human feedback. So we're just now at 3 o'clock. Did we want to go ahead and get started? I have a lot to say.
Yeah, let's go ahead and start.
Okay.
This is Jennifer Knievel. Can everybody hear me okay? I hope. My name is Jennifer Knievel, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Discussion Group Steering Committee in the Instruction section. And welcome everyone to the ACRL Midwinter Virtual Current Issues Discussion Forum hosted by the Instruction section. I wanted to say a few things first about technology. During the presentation, you'll notice when Kate shares her screen that your chat box will disappear. But if you just scroll up to the top, you can click on chat and the chat box will come back, and then you'll be able to watch the screen and also chat and type in comments. So look for that, and we'll be doing a few kind of interactive things on the way. I wanted to say just a little bit about Kate. She is, well, actually just mentioned, the Humanities Librarian at Western Michigan University. She's going to lead us in a discussion today on the value of using threshold concepts to shape information literacy instruction. We'll discuss the importance of teaching students the whys of research rather than just the how-tos, and learn how the shift in curricular focus can help librarians impart a meaningful and lasting understanding of research. Hopefully everyone had a chance to read some of the discussion questions ahead of time, and I think we are just about ready to get going. Kate, it's all you.
I'm going to go ahead and launch a Prezi presentation. So hopefully the technology will cooperate with us. And then one note is that when I go ahead and share my desktop, you are going to lose this right-hand navigation with the chat and the list and the Q&A. And what's going to happen is a bar is going to open up at the top of the screen, and you'll see a chance to open up different windows. And when I launch it, I'll show you how to do that. So let me go ahead and open up my browser. Okay, so if you see, you are sharing Google Chrome here, and you can highlight this window, and then the chat will open up. So you should, I think that's how it works. If you have any issues, type it into the chat box here. So let me get this started. I'm going to kind of have it hovering in the corner just so I can keep an eye on what's going on. Is it getting harder to hear me? Or is that from Jennifer's microphone? Oh, okay, great. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so let me go ahead and open it up into a full screen. And like I said, I'm going to have this chat hovering in the corner. So I'll try my best not to make you seasick, and I'll try to warn you when it's going to do some flipping. Okay, so today is going to be teaching the art of the academic dialogue, and it's going to be a discussion on threshold concepts. And I'm going to start with a quote from Socrates, and the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. So I am the humanities librarian at Western Michigan University. I am affiliated with the reference department, and I teach information literacy, and my key responsibility is probably English. We'll be talking about learning, which is no small task, but today we'll be talking about how to identify meaningful and lasting learning for our students in the information literacy curriculum. And in order to do this, we'll be talking about ACRL standards and how to prioritize them for students in higher education. And here I have the presentation. The outline for today is that the presentation will be about 40 minutes. And here's the link to the Prezi. If you want to open up another browser, you can, and then follow along with me. And then after, we will be having some breakout sessions. There'll be 5 breakout sessions, probably for about 20 minutes, and we'll be using Google Drive, and I'm going to be showing you how to do this later. Oh, okay, I'm just reading. Okay, and then after our breakout sessions, we'll reconvene. So in preparing for my presentation today, here were the initial reactions to my presentation. And I'll try to, please let me know if you guys are not listening, or if you guys are not hearing my voice if I'm looking away from my microphone. Okay. Great, state of Michigan. So today, I'm not going to attempt to define the process of learning, but I do want you to think about a few questions as we move forward in this conversation. And the first is, what is learning? And from there, we can ask ourselves, does learning imply knowledge? And is the acquisition of knowledge a stagnant, finite event? We could go on and include questions like, are there tangible artifacts that are testaments to the act of learning or acquiring knowledge? And if so, how do we measure it? So now that we've called into question the entire process of learning, we now have the task of challenging our understanding those who benefit from that process, meaning the students. So William G. Perry, a Harvard scholar in the 60s, I think many of you are probably familiar with him, identified a progression in the way the college mind or the college-aged mind develops. Essentially, young thinkers move from a binary, concrete way of viewing the world towards one that is contextualized. And this is not only for the way in which they see the world, but also how they approach problem solving. And as we move forward in this conversation, think about questions What do you know about your students and what they know? And how do you think they view their world? But more importantly, what is your bias as you answer these questions? So today I'm going to talk to you about how threshold concepts help me answer some of the questions above and help me identify the best ACRL standards for my students at Western Michigan University. So I'll be talking about threshold concepts as they, first of all, apply to students' learning, but I'll also be talking about how threshold concepts affected the way I look at teaching. Because at the heart of threshold concepts is the idea that they are, above all, transformational. And I realize I'm not presenting anything drastically new. It's just more perspective or case study or meditation on how I was able to use threshold concepts to improve my teaching. So again, I start with the quote from Socrates, in that all I know is nothing. And Socrates will actually play a very important role today in today's conversation, and I'll be talking about him again. So now we want to define threshold concepts, right? We want to have this common definition so we can work with this. So threshold concepts was a term coined by some professors in the UK, Mayer and Land, in the early 2000s, and it came about as a SOTL project, learning research project on improving teaching and learning. So threshold concepts, they're teaching moments that aren't based on skills, but more on the effect they have on the student at the cognitive level. And there's some accepted language or that they've identified when talking about threshold concepts, and here we have them. So they're transformational because they represent an ontological shift in the way students see the problem. Irreversible because it is a part of a process, and students need to build on concepts in order to advance on to more challenging ways of thinking. They're liminal in that it's, again, transitional and critical thinking. Critical thinking happens in this space of transition. They're troublesome because it's uncomfortable for the student to be forced into this new way of thinking, so it's challenging. And troublesome could also mean counterintuitive or even alien. So it's integrated in that it helps students make connections in a given discipline and think about what concepts will prove their mastery in that discipline. So students should ask themselves, it's what must they know, what should they know, and what could they know. And here's a great quote from 2003, I think one of the first articles they wrote. Closer to the mic, okay. Maybe if I turn up my volume, I don't know, does that sound any better? Threshold concepts are akin to a portal opening up new and previously inaccessible ways of thinking about something. It represents a transformed way of understanding or interpreting or viewing something without which the learner cannot progress. So this is from 2003. So right away, I want you to think about the idea of progress and maybe even process. So in this very broad description of threshold concepts, my first polling question, like to get some information from you guys is, oops, no, don't do that. There we go. Sorry, I don't want to make you seasick. So what do you identify as a threshold concept? So I'm talking to one of my colleagues who's here in the room with me. He gave this great example. He was like, well, it's like when Helen Keller was first able to feel and sound out and sign water. It's because it represented that she finally understood language and language made sense to her. So pulling from any discipline, can you guys think of other landmark threshold concepts, whatever it is? I don't know if. So think about it, and then I'd like to take a minute or so just to see what some of you come up with, and then we'll think about that as just for some, feedback. So you don't just necessarily have to listen to me. I'm looking at my colleagues in the room right now. Actions. Reading music notation. The earth is round. Oh, the earth is round. Or how about the earth revolving around the sun? I have a 2.5-year-old, so a baby understanding no is quite relevant. Yes, because it's the idea that this concept is something that will help them move on to get another level of thinking, so the cognitive development. So as you guys continue on, I want you feel free to add in more information on the chat screen. I'm going to go on and talk a little bit more about move on with my presentation. If I can, oh, here we go. I'm sorry. Okay, so now I want to shift to, so we have this very basic definition of special concepts. Now let's think about special concepts for information literacy. So of course we have this fantastic article from 2011 from Townsend, Brunetti, and Hofer. I think I said that correctly, I'm not sure. So some of the major arguments that I found quite relevant in this article is that they challenge the idea, threshold concepts for information literacy are interdisciplinary by nature, whereas Meyer and Lenz say that threshold concepts are discipline specific. So we as librarians know that interdisciplinary is important to our work. And also they challenge why ACRL does not necessarily prioritize standards, which go back to the what must you know, what could you know, and what should you know. Here's a quote from their article regarding, I'm just going to swear in German so you don't understand what I'm saying. Okay, so from the Townsend et al. Article, they do not offer consistent guidance for instructors on teaching priorities. Threshold concepts are, by nature, prioritized content because they are foundational concepts, meaning you need to go back to that idea of progress. You have to learn one in order to advance on to the next idea. Thank you, Veronica, for putting the citation in. Do I have the wrong page number? One problem, not problem, but one issue that I had with the article is that I thought the data could possibly be biased, because this data was basically, they put out a call for teaching librarians ideas on how they witnessed or viewed students being stuck at certain points with information literacy. So it's this idea that this is based on observations and not firsthand. So I'm concerned about the assumptions. And the threshold concepts that they do identify are great, but they still seem to be a little too performance-based for me, or skills-based, and I'm wondering, and we're going to explore that idea a little more. I wonder why. There we go. So, I'm sorry, I'm getting lost. I'm trying to read the chat, and so I'm getting a little bit of a confusion here with me. Sorry, just give me a second to. Okay, so I guess one last comment about information literacy and ACRL standards is that we have this idea that ACRL standards have adopted the terminology of using ideas like performance indicators and outcomes. But what we need to think about is the part of learning that isn't visible or accessible. What about the importance of that process? And it's also the process is also as relevant as the product, if not more. And these are the questions that actually led me to scrutinize my own teachings, like really break away from that product-based learning. So I don't know, you can't tell that that's Michigan, but that's Michigan under the polar blast we had last week. So now I'm going to go on and talk about how threshold concepts help me define learning, my definition of learning and knowledge. So in teaching for baccalaureate level writing class, I realized that I was experiencing a certain discomfort that I fondly refer to as curricular combat fatigue. And the fatigue I found came from my failure in not being able to successfully move away from skills-based lesson plans. we've been told that lesson plans based on concepts is pedagogically superior, yet I just couldn't make it work. And right now when I'm talking about concepts, I'm not necessarily talking about threshold concepts or foundational concepts. I'm talking about just moving away from skills-based. So I was determined to base lessons on concepts, yet I was still met with the same look of, I'm not impressed, or worse, I was still faced with the question etched onto hundreds of students' board spaces over many semesters, which asked, why am I here, right? We have this, I was failing at giving information literacy a privilege, or information literacy a purpose. And I really needed to figure out how to answer this question for these students. And it finally occurred to me that rather than give them their answer, I needed more information, and I met them with my own question, and that was, how did you get here? So it was my first experience with this threshold concepts as applied to teaching. So it was a paradigm shift, right? It was moving away from this ontological perspective of teaching, studying, which, you know, you would study the what is right now, to a more phenomenological approach, which studies the actual process. So I was really interested in how they got into my classroom. So that's what I wanted to explore. So what team are you on? If you were to assess your students, are you more interested in the phenomenological approach, the study of their experience, or the ontological approach, which is the study of what they can do right now? Pedagogical forensics. So it occurred to me that by focusing on the instance and artifact of teaching and learning, I was ignoring its inherently progressive nature. And how could I effectively teach them when I had no idea what their path looked like? I was more interested in how they acquired knowledge rather than where they were right now and what they could produce for me. So my failure in teaching was that I just did not consider this experiential knowledge. So pedagogical forensics led me to discover that I brought a lot of assumptions and bias into the classroom. I graduated from high school in 1988. I only had to write a 5-page paper a year and for my AP English class. And I just assumed that my students, if they were in college, would have at least had this bare minimum experience, but I was wrong. So when we move on, what are some of your biases that you bring into the classroom? Is it age, gender? You know, what do you bring into the classroom that skews your perception of how your perception of your students and what they know? And I realize I'm losing all the, here's the chat there. And this idea of teacher bias, how do we break away from that? That's actually, you know, I didn't even consider that. Do they want to learn? That's a really good point. I like that. Right, the bias of what librarians think is important. That's what I'm wondering, is that was that bias in, visible in the article from Townsend, Brunetti, and Huffer? Oh, cultural education. Yeah, okay. I'm just reading the chat from folks. Yep. Yep. Media literacy, another huge one. Yep. All right, go on, keep going on, and then I'm just gonna keep talking. So I went ahead and developed a study, and in the process of canvassing students, here, I'll move this out of the way, I think. There we go. No, why does it do that? Oh, Prezi, my friend and my foe. So in the process of canvassing my students, oh no, it's really tricky to navigate between a chat, a presentation, and a document. So I needed to learn more about my students, so I created this study. So I could, my goal was to eradicate as much of this bias as possible. So that meant I would have to assess them. And like I said, English 1050 is a baccalaureate level writing class. So I read a bit about the validity of pre and post assessment and discussed it with colleagues. And the question now wasn't should I or shouldn't I assess, but more what should I assess? Do I want to assess skills such as how to interpret a citation, how to define a scholarly article, etc. But these skills-based questions would indicate how they could perform right now, and from that I might be able to deduce a certain learning experience. But again, that would all be based on my assumption. And while deciding on what to survey, I stumbled upon my second threshold concept for teaching. I wanted to know more about them and their experience. I didn't want them to tell me what they had learned and at which level they could perform. I wanted to know their experience with the research process. So I asked them, very basic questions like, when you were in high school, did you ever have to write a paper? Or did you ever use your library or media center when you were in high school to complete a project? Or, even more basic, did your high school have a library or media center that you could use? And this is the type of data that isn't tracked in the university-wide system that houses their GPAs and SAT scores or their school district. This is invisible academic experience that shapes who they are now and emphasizes their process. Most shocking results so far, 18% have never written a paper. 30% have never used a library to complete an assignment. And the majority of my students are coming directly from high school. So this, they're traditional students, graduated in the last couple of years. And this is really important information for me to have. And this experiential data tells me which personal assumptions are hindering my teaching, like the one I mentioned above about, having to write a paper. So back to you guys again. What would you like to know about your student base? So for example, some of the other questions that I asked were, which classes required you to write a paper? Because in my mind, I just assumed it was English. But I had students having to write papers for math class, history, social studies, all sorts of stuff. Or I even asked them, what was the average length of a paper that you had to write? And it was pretty much 5 pages, but I've had some students say they've written 10, 15-page papers when in high school, which is pretty impressive. Ooh, fear of writing. That's very interesting. Right. Oh my God, you guys are going fast. Okay, it's hard to keep up. Okay, keep going, and I'm going to continue. Let me just make sure I can find my space so I'm not lost again. I'm going to do a time set at Anna. Okay. So in processing, or the students, it dawned on me that I was anticipating a certain set of results and that these would point me to the best ACRL standards to use, kind of like a deus ex machina of information literacy. But then my teaching would be perfect, right? So I was shocked to find that the results led me to on a much more philosophical path. So instead, I found myself rethinking, one, why are these students in college? What are they asked to do in college? And what do they hope to carry forward after graduating? The process of internalizing these results for me was not easy. And in fact, I would probably say I was outright defiant because it meant that I had to restructure how I looked at my teaching, and it left my raw expectations exposed. And I also fought it because it made me realize that I was still heavily attached to the idea that students need to perform or produce something to prove that they've learned something. So my thinking was that because then my thinking was, if we didn't have these artifacts, then how would we know that they acquired any sort of knowledge? But it occurred to me that acquiring knowledge isn't a product, and the process can't always be represented by a product. It can be both internal and external as an activity. And it was freeing when I finally rejected this consumerist attitude, you know, that I kind of blindly accepted for so long when I was talking about the acquisition of knowledge, because, you know, simply knowledge is not a commodity. So I needed to shift my teaching from not just being a support teacher for creating these academic artifacts, so papers, presentations, and my goal essentially is to help them find their voice in these academic artifacts. I also needed to figure out how to validate the internal and external process of discovering one's academic voice, not just for me or for other librarians, but also for the broader academic community. So in high school, students are asked to produce answers, but now in college, university level, they're asked to produce knowledge and give voice to that knowledge. And this could be either critically assess accepted knowledge or produce new knowledge from an academic community, and which is a process which is really foreign to them. So there's argument and there's logic, and these two comrades of rhetoric have a long, elaborate history. And in turning to these philosophical forefathers of, say, Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato, the overarching threshold concept that emerged for me was this idea of the academic dialogue, which is the exchange of ideas expressed through a well-developed, accountable voice. But so what is the academic dialogue really, and what does it have to do with information literacy? So the academic dialogue is where reading and writing and research intersect, either simultaneously or apart. They can be taught individually, but always need to have the other be taught with the other in mind, because the idea of the process is a good reader makes a good researcher, makes a good writer, and the reverse is also true. Well, that's the goal, right? But what is the end goal of the academic dialogue? Is it to write a paper or give a presentation, to persuade or to find new truth? Yes, to all of those, but also to critically assess and challenge one's own accepted truths. And if we looked at a few of these philosophers, we'll realize that the voice is at the core of good thinking. If I understand that, maybe not. We'll find out. So Socrates, wait, I can't jump to him. No, Socrates, don't go away. There we go. Sorry, so for Socrates, dialogue teaches the individual to critically evaluate knowledge. And that is at the heart of what we teach, or so much of what we teach. The dialectical investigation and discussion of truths empowers readers to seek their own solution. And if we think back to this idea of Perry with these students who are binary or think in black and white terms, this could be a really hard thing for them to learn. So Socrates asks that we challenge the writer as we're reading, and we need to help our students challenge that author. And the power actually lies in the reader. So there's that power paradigm that we also need to think about in writing and research and reading. So Aristotle and so Plato, then Aristotle, kind of the progression. The dialogue and the art of this, they meditate on the art of the dialogue and persuasion. And the art of persuasion is the idea that is the synthesis of everything that, of all information that you gather during the research process. And then from that synthesis, which is the act of writing, that power shifts back to the author, but then you have to start navigating between author and writer, the student as author, student as reader, but then also student as researcher. So with any dialogue, there is this constant shift of responsibility, right? So reader, writer, researcher, and students need to be aware of this shift as it occurs and how to either navigate it, scrutinize it, or manipulate it, right, for their own needs. And that dialogue, when they're reading or writing or researching, that can be an internal process and doesn't necessarily need. Is that okay? I think Katie's telling me its voice is going down. I'll try turning up the volume. So it's an internal or external process. So with this information, I was really able to scrutinize and go back and look at those ACRL standards and scrutinize how skills, if they were skills dependent, process dependent, or perhaps concept dependent. And I wanted to figure out how I could reorganize them, and take them down from their pedagogical perch and start, looking at them as what must they know, what should they know, and what could they know for students. So the academic dialogue is this meta-threshold concept that helps students find voice and participate in the community of knowledge. Now, there are some other thinkers that also look at this concept of conversation or dialogue. And one is Lev Vygotsky. Some of you may know him. So it's a social learning theorist, and he talks about, I think you guys can be able to see. There we go. So Lev Vygotsky talks about the zone of proximal development, and it's this idea of guidance and collaboration where people can learn in a certain social environment. So he says human learning presupposes a specific social nature and a process by which children grow into the intellectual life of those around them. So this idea of conversation and dialogue and opening up to new ideas is very attractive to me. I'm just going to fight with this all day, I think. I hope you guys are still following what I'm talking about. So so now that we have this idea of conversation and why am I here and how did you get here, the next question is, which probably students are thinking, is where am I going? And we need to think that many of our students probably won't have a career in academia, and it could be fair to say that we probably have a better idea of knowing what their future may hold for them. But with this in mind, we can tailor the IO curriculum to help, to anticipate some of these questions of where I'm going. And with this, we can think about concept of dialogism, and dialogism emphasizes conversation. And for our students, this means conversations with peers and colleagues, coworkers, etc. And it's these dialogic interactions where new truths are created. And truths are born between people collectively, and it's this idea that truth is collective. And as a creator or a consumer of truth, students need to know that they are a part of this collective. So it's this conversation, this dialogue, that we are a participant. Students need to know that when he or she engages in this dialogic interaction, they're accepting responsibility and promoting truth or acknowledging complicity and promoting non-truths. The question to ask them, to talk to them about, is whether or not they fully understand the consequences of this text. And then as librarians, we can help them make the best choices. We could continue the conversation with Jacques Derrida. I swear this is the last theorist. There's an instance during the act of writing or reading, or we could generalize it and say the processing of information. There's this instance when there's a slight hiccup in the transitional phase, so that liminal phase again, where the reader becomes the writer or the writer becomes the reader. And there's this moment where you are neither and you are both. And that's where one's true voice is found. And that's the idea of auto-affectation. So a good example of this is when you're looking at yourself in the mirror. You're constantly the voyeur and you're also the reader at the same time. And you're kind of shifting, but there's this moment, this liminal space where you're your true self. So what is that true self, and how can we help students explore that? So it could mean that mastering the art of the academic dialogue can be measured by how comfortable students are in taking risks in a discursive liminal state, right? They're in some sort of transition. So now I want to shift over to the idea of play and risk. Sorry, I'm just taking a look at the chats. So I want to talk about play and risk, and there's that, and it kind of goes back to that Derrida idea of voice, going, that suspended place. Risk is scary. Our binary thinkers, according to Perry, probably won't wager a bet, so we need to alleviate it with some sense of play and provide a space where risk, when met with success or failure, are equally important. And I know there's a lot of play theory out there. I have not yet explored a lot of it. I've only briefly encountered it. I haven't had a chance to fully indulge in it. I think I watched a TED Talk at one point that kind of gave me this idea of, we play and failure is okay, because when you're thinking about, if you have a snowball fight and you're trying to hit your friend, you don't hit them, it's a failure, sort of, but it's not as tragic, I guess. So, yeah, so play. And also, when we think about failure, so here's like an image of liminal space, you're neither up nor down, but where do you find your voice? And in play, if you think about taking risk, play celebrates process and isn't bound by success or failure. So here's an image. I'm crossing the finish line at a marathon. I was supposed to hit 350. That was my benchmark. I got it in 4:03. So the question is, did I fail? I don't know. But do we need to think in such finite terms? And it feels like in higher education we do, and it's limiting. So it kind of distills down to this simple equation: students have a voice. They're choosing truths or creating truths. There is a certain responsibility in participating in the academic dialogue. Dialogue, whether internal or external. And as teachers, we need to provide a safe environment free of bias where students can explore these truths, try out their voice, and then we need to be supportive and redirect them when and if they fail. So that's like the essence of my teaching philosophy and how I go into developing my lesson plan, which is what I want to do now. So now I'm going to identify, I think, 3 or 4 special concepts based on academic dialogue. And then I'm going to show you a few lesson plans. And I should be able to do this in 10 minutes. And then we'll do our breakout session. So hang in there. Yeah, I agree. Fail sounds very risky, and I wonder if there's other terminology that we can think about. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so threshold concepts that I identified for this academic dialogue. So the first one was getting unstuck, and I'm going to relate it back to information literacy. So getting unstuck, finding a voice, and being faithful to or honoring your truth. So let's see, that's like a new language, and it's actually it's new language for ideas that I think many of us are already working with. So my lesson plan includes concept mapping, journaling, Googlewhacking, and exploring knowing what you want to know. So sounds big, I know, but okay. And as I go through these lessons, I want you to ask yourself, are they conceptual? Do they present a teaching moment where there's a conceptual shift? Are they transformational? Are they liminal? Or are they troublesome? And how do they promote success or progress in the academic dialogue? So, so this idea of unstuck is that, the most common question I get at the reference desk is, I don't know where to start. And I think that's probably the hardest question, because I don't know if the student doesn't understand the assignment, or if they don't understand why they're doing the assignment, or if they don't know how to organize their thoughts, whatever. So in the old language, it would sound like, I don't know where to begin, or the librarian might say, well, we need to narrow or broaden the topic. But in this new language, in this special concept language, we would talk about this terms of stuck places. And stuck places is a special concept identified by Lather and a few others. And it's this pre-writing, pre-liminal space where ideas can congeal and a dialogue can take shape. So for our students, we need to remember that they're binary thinkers, and this will be hard for them, so we need to approach with caution. And we need to play because there may be a certain failure rate. So finding your truth and developing your voice. So the old language would be, I need to write a thesis statement, or I need to write, and for librarians, we would say, well, what's your research question? Well, this new language is, well, what's your truth? What's the truth that you want your reader to find? And, so in old language, what's your thesis statement, right? And then another example is trust. Another threshold concept of trust. So the old language is credibility and accessing information, right? So is the source credible? I mean, that's, it's so dry. But, what about an affective approach to this? Can you trust this information? And, if you cite this source, are you responsible for perpetuating misinformation and ignorance? Are you willing to be complicit in this act? And what are you going to do with your voice in the academic dialogue? Another idea is, and finally the idea of questioning, knowing what you want to know. It's the idea of understanding what question you have and how that directs you to what information you need to find. So let me walk you through these concepts in a lesson plan. And let me just double check. Ooh, pre-search. I have not heard that before. Love it. Pre-search. So for concept mapping, and I do have a link over here. Here we go, concept mapping. I have another Prezi, and you can access this Prezi later if you want to look at it. So concept mapping is created by this guy in the 70s. His name is Joseph Novak. And basically it's this idea of organizing knowledge, and that with these different nodes represent ideas, but it's the way that these nodes are connected is where new ideas are created. And it's this idea of this genesis, right, of where ideas. And so I have students, it takes about 15 minutes. I have students come in through working groups of 3. They go to the whiteboards, and each student has 5 minutes. They talk to their peers, and they try to ask themselves what they know, what they want to know, what their friends know, other ideas where they could go with this topic. So it's a lot of fun, and they really get a lot out of it. 5 minutes, and all the while I'm walking around talking to the students, and the instructor is walking around, and we're engaging in this conversation with the students. And what they don't know is that it's this meta academic dialogue going on, is that they're now breaking out of their silos and starting to talk to each other about knowledge, which is a fascinating experience. And it's probably one of the best parts of my day, my teaching day. So this, what they do is they do their concept mappings. A lot of them will take a picture of it on their phone, and then we'll come back to their seats, and then we'll try to think about how to turn that concept map into an idea or a focus, right, for their paper. So instead of saying, okay, now let's write your research question, I asked them to write social learning concept, blah, blah, blah. So I asked them to write a letter to their teacher. I was going to say Dear John, but that's just not right. So Dear Diary, whatever, journaling. So writing a letter to their professor, and I prompt them with, what do you want to talk about? Where do you want to lead your reader in this process, right? So this idea of taking away this formality, making it a personal space, but also, and like with concept mapping, it's a space for exploration and play. There's no bad idea at this point. And this Dear Diary letter, this writing out their, the points that they want to make, the sources that they may need, they can explore it. It's a draft, and it's not finite, so they don't have to be so hooked into this I'm going to fail idea. I've been noticing a lot of stuff about journaling lately, and again, I have a friend here who works on it quite a bit, but I haven't explored it as much as I would like to. That's probably going to be my next endeavor, that and play theory. So the next one is Googlewhacking. I don't know if you guys know what this is. I did this in graduate school. That's it's where you try to put 2 words into Google to only get 1 result. It's probably near impossible at this point. I mean, this was back in 2002. I don't know. So I don't know, but it's this idea where students can play with search terms, and we're actually promoting failure, because really the idea of only getting 1 result in the research world is kind of a failure. But now it's just an idea of play. But it gets them used to the idea of, and you could do this on any database, right? If you have like Summon or something, you could do a Google Whack kind of project to see what's out there to like get the least amount of hits. So it's just a way to have fun with search terms without realizing that you're having fun with search terms, right? That's that old language of, you know, what are your key terms that you want to use, like this very methodical way of approaching research, and just trying to beat the system. And then, so this is probably the what I was talking about earlier, is what do you want to know? So understanding your questions. And this slide actually comes from my colleague, Ed Eckel, who's actually in the room with me. And he made up this fantastic diagram. And it helps students understand the different, where information or where answers can be found. So there are very simple questions, and there are then it kind of goes down and develops into more complex questions. So with these questions, students learn that they need to go to different places to find the answers. So simple meaning, yeah, Google can help you with that, but then more complex meaning you probably need a database or some sort of academic or whatever resource to help you. And then, what is my purpose in life? Well, I don't know. God.google.com. So that's the essence of this lesson plan that I've developed so far. And this has been a process that's been going on for about 2 years. I've been hacking away at this little by little, and it really started in earnest last spring when I was involved in a really awesome conversation with Ed and a colleague from Hope College, and we were just exploring a lot of this, and it's just been a matter of chipping away at it to try to figure out, to get to the bottom of it. So now, and then, you know, with the lesson, you know, this only takes about 40 minutes. I don't know how much time you guys get. I'm pretty lucky. I have a lot of time available to me to teach information literacy, but these types of lessons are pretty easy to do and not that time consuming. However, I will say that getting faculty buy-in is difficult. I know that in our latest live call, there was a comment pretty much directed at me, which said, I don't want to hear the librarian opine about, about concept mapping. I was like, oh, okay, right. So, because I think they are all still very much entrenched in this skill space, like they need to know how to cite MLA. So it's unfortunate, but you know. So that's my information right now. So now what I want to do is we're going to enter the breakout session, if I can figure out how to, here we go. So we're going to go into the breakout sessions. And let me show you how that's going to happen. So on the Prezi, if over here in this quadrant are links to the Google Docs. So actually, maybe we'll just type them into the chat. And it's 5 to 4. We have 35 minutes, and I was hoping for maybe 20 minutes for this assignment or this part. So we would all choose one of these breakout sessions, and they're going to be hosted by some other some volunteers from the ACRL committee who put this webinar together. And basically, you're all going to be looking at the same question, and that's looking at the standards. What do you see as must know, could know, and should know? Really, and that's just a really basic starting point. What do we need to know? What do our students, what must they know in order to advance? And the should know is, that would be like bonus points. So there's Liz Bernal, Bridget Schumacher, Crystal Lewis, Veronica Ariano, and Jennifer Neville. So this is what it looks like. I have breakout session 1 open, and you guys can choose whichever one you want. So here we have, so Liz is the session leader, and she's the one who can edit the document. If you want to make a comment and say this is a must, all you need to do is highlight it, and then go to this comment up here and say whatever you want to say. Okay. And then we will reconvene back here, 4:20 tops, and then we will hopefully have, and if you have any questions that you want to ask me that I can prepare for, type them into the chat now and I can take a look at them. And I'm going to be jumping from breakout to breakout. So I hope everyone is, can follow that process. We were going to do a breakout session in the webinar itself. Unfortunately, WebEx does not have a breakout capability, so we had to find an alternative, unfortunately. So, okay. Okay, great. Thank you, Veronica. You're putting the links in. And so I'm going to jump from room to room, and I'm going to have fun reading the chat log as well. So we'd love to see. You're welcome, Amy. Thank you. And this session will be recorded, or it is being recorded, and will be posted on the ACRL website. Also, my fuzzies are public. So if this URL here, fuzzy.com/users/Kate Langen, if you ever want to go back and look, I also have a link to a bibliography, link to concept mapping, etc. I'm going to mute my mic for the moment. I think. I don't know how to do this. I don't want to like totally shut everything down. I also have 2 graphs for each document. One is for the indicators, and one is for the outcomes. And if you can only get to the indicators, that's fine. I figured this is just an idea. These are also public and can be accessed at any time. It would be kind of fun to take a look and see what you guys come up with. Okay. I think Ed and I were just sitting here talking, if anyone's in this room right now, and looking at the documents, we probably should have just focused on what is the absolute minimum must we know in information literacy. And Ed's comment was, we're librarians, we think they're all important. Yeah, it's true. So maybe if we were to go back and just focus on what must we know. But, you know, it's just an idea. This is really, the exercise is just a chance for us to go back and look at these standards. And, you know, they are, the new ones will be unveiled. What they said, the draft will be unveiled in February. So very interesting to see how I got the email, but I haven't followed the link to see what they have there. Oh, I am. I think my microphone is failing. I see that the cord is all frayed. Ed was telling me that my voice is fading in and out, so I think it's time for me to get a new headset. I knew this was going to happen the day of the presentation. Oh, okay. Only 50 people can edit a document. Yeah. Okay. 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 So maybe for everybody, if you're done looking at the standards, if you could leave the document so other people can try to access it. I was wondering. It's too bad we couldn't get. The idea was to have 5 mini chat sessions happening in WebEx, but unfortunately that wasn't possible. I don't know what I'm doing with this information. What should I be doing with this information, you guys? Should we, like, all 80 of us co-author an article? Oh, that would be hilarious. Oh, you guys are all making progress. That's great. I'm going to close out just so I give up my space. And then the conveners, or the people who are editing the documents, maybe we could just have them focus on the must know. Maybe we can just start there just for time. I'll also put, well, the links to the documents are in the Prezi. So as long as you have that Prezi URL, you'll be able to access all of that information. We are hopefully reconvening in less than, so at 4:20 I thought, but if people are closer to done now, that would be great. I want to have enough time for questions at the end. If there are questions, and if I can answer them, that's the other variable. Really not much time. So I want to have time to, one, hear the consensus from the people who are editing, some quick conclusions, some quick remarks to conclude, and question time. Okay, breakout 4 is done. Veronica, could you write down in the chat the must-haves for the indicators and the must-haves for the outcomes in the chat so everyone can see that, and just label it for breakout 4, please? And then I guess we can do that with each group. Or, I don't know, maybe. But seriously, what are we going to do with all this information? I think there's a lot of interesting, ideas that is coming out of this exercise. It'd be interesting to write up a summary maybe after and then post it on the ACRL website. But also, in thinking about the must-knows, does that change when you're talking about the audience? If we're talking about a student who just graduated from high school last year, or when we are talking about non-traditional students who are returning to school after a 10, 15-year hiatus, how does that change? How does that change the must-knows? And how do we manage that? So we have Standard 4, Standard 5, Standard 3, and Standard 2. Did Standard 1 come back? Is that Liz, I think? I don't know if she's done yet. Great, thanks, Liz. Oh gosh, just wondering. I was thinking, since everyone's pretty much done with the documents, would it be okay if I just started with my closing remarks and then we could open it up for questions? I know the session pretty much ends and we get kicked out of the space in 10 minutes. So for everybody, just so you know what's happening is that the moderators are putting all the must-knows in right now. So, okay, I'll take 2 yeses as a go-ahead because that's minority rules. So I guess in talking about information literacy and IL standards, the conversation, right, there's so much going on, but like I said, the draft is going to be unveiled in February. But, this conversation is for everyone, and it's an appeal to step away from the standards while acknowledging their importance because they do exist because they give our profession and those in other disciplines a common language or foundation about what we do. But why? Why put so much emphasis on distancing ourselves? Well, because an important message is we need to reassess not how we teach, but how we define our position as a teaching librarian in the university setting. So what if we were to separate ourselves from a lesson plan based on assignments that oftentimes rob students of their voice? So yes, we're brokers of information, gatekeepers or translators of the information world, but more so, as Bonnie already mentioned, we are the keystone species in the information ecology, and the academic dialogue is the mode of communication in this ecology. Students need a safe place to explore their voice, learn how to be true to their voice, and faithful to truth. And being information literate can empower them. So our role is changing, and we can't remain under the same job description where people expect us to teach citation styles or whatever. It's misleading, right? And we need to elevate our profession. So there's this epistemological shift in our way of teaching and how we define our teaching. So do we want them to perform, or do we want them to understand the process of knowing, like any other discipline, right? We're not asking anything else that other disciplines aren't asking. And their role, we want their process of knowing and their role in the process of disseminating information. So I think the shift is being acknowledged already in many ways. So for example, a lot of libraries around the country or wherever are reconfiguring or reconsidering how they provide service and how they offer space, and are creating new integrated service points where students can engage in this academic dialogue with all the necessary support, whether it be research support, writing support, tech support, whatever. But with all this, for now, the biggest hurdle is admitting at some level a certain defeat. Some, maybe many teaching faculty and librarian colleagues don't understand this need for transition because they're very comfortable in the space of learning or teaching skills. But frankly, I may make enemies, but I think we need to stop chasing after that academic artifact as the end sum that defines what we do. We as a profession need to identify a clear, autonomous concept for our students that transcends the curricular infighting and administrative policing that hinder learning and critical inquiry. So I'm going to end there. I'm going to end with that idea, how do we break away from teaching to an assignment, which forces us into a skills-based approach to teaching. So I thank you so much for your time and attention, and I'm happy to field any questions. I'll be presenting the lesson plan in detail in Grand Rapids in May at the LOX conference, so you can look for me there. It's called A Tableau Vivant, Multimodal, Multisensory Teaching Experience for Special Concepts in the Information Literacy Classroom. The Prezi has links to all sorts of information. It has links, it has my email address, it has links to my live guides, it has links to my ScholarWorks accounts, and all that. So if there are any questions, I don't know, you can put them in the chat or the Q&A, I'm not really sure which would be most appropriate. We have 5 minutes. If not, send me a private message and I'd be happy to email you later if I miss your question. Yes, thank you, breakout leaders. I know we kind of put you on the spot for using the Google Docs. It came to us yesterday very late in the day.
Hi, this is Veronica. I just wanted to encourage everyone before you go, I went ahead and put in assessments, a link to our feedback survey in the chat area. So if you get a chance, it's a very short SurveyMonkey survey. We'd just like to get your feedback on our very first virtual discussion forum. So thank you.
Can I rate myself on the survey? She was awesome.
Well, again, this is Veronica, one of the co-chairs of the IS discussion group committee, and we just really want to thank everyone for coming today, and thank you, Kate, for leading us on this really fabulous discussion. Jennifer went ahead and posted links to Kate's presentation, as well as a link to the digest for this discussion. And all of the Google Docs will be available afterwards for everyone to look at. So again, thank you for coming. If you have any questions, the chat area is still open. I think Kate might be available for a few more minutes, but thanks again.
Go to the reference desk. I have my shift tonight until 8:30. So if you want, I would be happy to handle your questions and email you. I see that Heather and Kate have sent questions. So I'm just afraid we're going to get kicked out of the meeting room. So if you could give me your email address, I would love. Core instructors. Oh, so Kate, when you say core instructors English 1050, you know, I've tried my damnedest to get a conversation going, and frankly, it's just really tricky to get them to even get started. So I tried, but no, this is just me. And you know, yeah, there are issues with that because there's a lot of pushback, I guess. I hope that answers your question, Kate. I need a pen. Yeah, time constraints and bad assignments. Oh, don't get me started. Maybe in a minute or two, I think. Yeah, I just wrote a huge book chapter on teaching the teachers. It's going to be out, I think, in February. It's a book, yeah, so the editors. The link is, if you go to my ScholarWorks, there's a link to that book chapter there. So I wonder if I can cut and paste this. I can save it and work on emails tonight. Yay. I get a ton of pushback and skills from faculty. They hate it. But I don't tell them what to teach, right? Why do they get to tell me what to teach? The students love the concept mapping. They love it because I have music playing in the background and it's a really lively environment and we're talking and they, you know, frankly, they love to talk about themselves. Why not give them that opportunity? It's so much fun. Exactly. And you know, when I did the survey about asking students, the instructors' responses to the results were hilarious. Their jaws were dropping when they realized a lot of their students had never written a paper or that had never used the library. And so these assumptions aren't just for us, you know, teacher bias, it's for everybody. And it's a pretty easy remedy. And it's just amazing. I don't know why it took me so long to think about it. Okay, so all right, I have all the information I need. So thanks, guys.
We're going to go ahead and close up the meeting room. And again, all of Kate's information is available in the Prezi and the links that we sent out. And a recording of this session will be made available and we'll notify everyone via the ILI listserv, as well as post a link to the recording on the ACRL instruction section homepage. Thanks again.
Thank you.